All right, welcome to the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast. This is Travis Pangburn. Well, we just had probably the biggest event that we've ever produced over this last weekend. And this featured a discussion between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, which was moderated by Brett Weinstein. And the response has been catastrophic in a good way. You hear one other voice laughing on the mic today because I'm joined by our director of media, Armin who was doing interviews and just making it happen on Saturday and Sunday. So I just want to start off by saying it's becoming popular to think. Thinking generally for a long period of time has been thrown to the back burner while we attempt to grasp at straws. Some of our traditions are ridiculous. Science and reason shows us the path to what beliefs we should keep and the ones we should let go. If we're not thinking, this all seems impossible. So, Armin, what was your take on the discussion?
I really think this was a historical event, and I think people are going to look back at this debate and look at this as a turning point, because this was not just between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. I think this was a clash of two major trending ideologies, one of them on the way out and one of them growing. And this was one of the main battlefronts that we provided. This was a battleground between two ideas, not just two people. And the people that were there that night, on those 2 nights, got to witness it firsthand. And I was so happy to be there at that time. It was really one of the highlight moments of my life. I really do think, like, as you said, making thinking popular. I think we had in our history through the Enlightenment era, thinking and reason and science was becoming very popular. And I think ever since then there has been so many forces disputing it and fighting against it. And these voices come in many different forms, and sometimes they even try to take credit for the results, for the fruits of the enlightenment values. And I think what we were witnessing was the forces of reason. I mean, I'm going to be biased about this, but I really think that we were looking at forces of reason versus the forces of anti-reason, and reals versus feels. Basically, we saw it on stage. And I really think that what we were saying, like, right now we have some major ideologies fighting with each other. We have secularism and atheism. We have Islam. We have Christianity. We have ethno-nationalism. And I think these ideas, some of them are growing, some of them seem to be on the way out. And I think what we saw there was two of these major ideologies being represented by currently the two most popular spokesperson of two of those ideologies were there on stage.
Yeah, I try to think back at least for the past 50 years here, and I wonder if events of this scale would have even been possible. Yeah. I mean, it's not like these are protests. It's not like we're coming out to hear two people battle it out on the street for free in a protest. People are paying good, hard-earned money to come and witness these discussions, because there is actually something to be gained if you're there witnessing this. And it's not the same as listening to people talk on a podcast and discuss various issues. There is a thick air, a potential for artistic and scientific inspiration in the air.
Right.
And the air was so thick this weekend that things seem, when I looked around, when I saw the audience coming in and I was observing Jordan and Sam and when we were hanging out backstage, it's like everything was moving through this thick air. And it was almost as if things were in slow motion. And I think that was just my brain just realizing that what was going to happen here was extremely special.
Yeah, and if you think about it, there are so many speeches in history and events that when people are witnessing it, they might not recognize that this is one of those speeches that people are going to be playing again and again and again and listening to it, and they're going to become like famous speeches. Like, how many of them are there? And I think, like, when I'm listening, for example, to Kennedy or Martin Luther King or other people, I wonder how many people in the audience knew that many years after, people are going to refer back to these events and these speeches as turning points, as voices that represented the ideas of the time, of revolutionary ideas of the time. And I think what we were witnessing there was one of those. These videos are going to be played again and again and again for years to come. But again, if you were there, you're going to be one of those people that say, I was there, I witnessed that.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's what I want to make clear is that being at these events, the reason why you go to see your favorite rock star is that air that I'm talking about. And it's not this thing you can measure. Yeah, I mean, we can set up scientific models to come to a consensus that when we get human beings together to witness something like this, there's a feeling and this emotional charge that you can get from it just by the sheer anticipation. And I know there's many of you out there that weren't able to be at the event, and you're probably feeling a level of that anticipation right now in when's this content going to be available, and when am I going to be able to download it, and what's going on. And I will say, for now, we're still figuring out how we're going to release this content and when. And it's probably going to be something we're probably going to release all the content from the Jordan and Sam talks all at once. It's not really going to be anytime soon, because it's looking right now that we might be doing quite a few different events with Jordan and Sam coming up this fall. So rest assured, you will have access to the content eventually. But when exactly that is, we're still sorting that out. There's lots of parties involved in making these decisions. But I can guarantee that we will be releasing this content. But this doesn't keep people from talking about what happened, and that's what we wanted to give you all today, just kind of a taste of what we went through. I will start by saying that, so at the beginning of the day, I met up with Sam and Jordan and a few other people, and Brett eventually as well. And I was there when Sam and Jordan did meet for the first time. And it's funny, in your mind, the way our minds work, I had this hilarious vision of this, shoulders thrown back, walking upright and presenting himself to the world. Jordan Peterson bursts through the door, and Sam Harris is standing there, and Jordan says, "Well, if it isn't that Harris." And then Sam looks at him and says, "Hello, Jordan." But it wasn't theatrical. It was how most apes have ever met and reacted in human history. They shook hands, they were happy to see each other, and then we all just got in a car and went and had dinner. Jordan and Sam sat beside each other, and we basically just talked about the event, and we spent a little bit of time talking about what was going to be discussed, but Not much. I mean, one of the things that I think is great about the Pangburn philosophy events is that we don't really screen things. We don't decide on structure. We don't figure out what's going to be discussed. A lot of the time, it's just like, you guys are going to have the stage and let's have a conversation.
Right.
And usually we want to talk about the issues that really affect people, and it's great to get people on the other side of some contentious issues. But I think, the main goal was to make sure that we didn't let things go down this rabbit hole of talking over each other and not listening to one another. And that was what
Brett.
During dinner, Brett was, he was definitely driving that home, being like, I think there's a possibility here for us to fall off the rails. But we had some conversations, and Brett definitely had some major input at dinner when we were discussing how this was going to all happen.
There was a part where Sam said that we are at war with our moderator. That was so funny.
Yeah, that was my favorite. I had to tweet that quote because, at one point, Brett is like, okay, we need to move on from this because you guys aren't going to get anywhere. And then it was just like two kids watching TV saying, just one more minute. That was the feeling.
That was the time that both Sam and Jordan were uniting with each other against Brett because they wanted to continue. But I think having Brett there was so great because every single conversation they had with each other before, they got stuck on one thing that they thought that they needs to be resolved, but the audience were like, just move on to the next thing, and they couldn't, right? And I think Brett was he did such a great, and he did it without actually saying a lot. I think he did it brilliantly. And one thing that I loved, at the end of each event, Brett asked if they wanted to skip the Q&A, and the fact that everybody in the audience said like, yes, skip the Q&A because they wanted to continue hearing them. That was so amazing. First of all, you can never. I think it was brilliant because we shouldn't decide ourselves to cut the Q&A because people might want the Q&A, but leaving it to the audience to cut the Q&A, I think that was brilliant.
Yeah, there was on the second night he did like a crowd. He asked, "Okay, whoever wants a Q&A, cheer now!" And then the crowd. Then there was quite a few people who wanted the Q&A, but then the dominant force was skipping the Q&A and letting the conversation going. But that is a testament to how great this conversation was.
Right.
This wasn't a, necessarily just each party just dodging the question. Like they really did work through some issues, even though on some of these questions, these direct questions that were asked, there seemed to be some tap dancing still. But
Brett brought it back.
Yes. But Brett was there to help with that, and I think that was vital.
Yeah. So he did three things. First of all, he made sure they don't get stuck on something. He made sure that if they're not addressing what they were asked, he brings them back to it. And another thing he did brilliantly is when he felt like there was a miscommunication going on, he rephrased one of the speakers to the other person, maybe in a way that maybe he thought that the other person might understand it better. And he did it such a brilliant way. And I think both of them very appreciate it, except that one part where they were both uniting against it. I think he said it was mutiny. It was sort of so funny. There were so many funny moments. I was surprised how many like humorous moments were at the event. There was a huge discussion about masturbation.
Yeah, like who would have thought that Peterson and Harris would have got on to masturbation? But I'm not kidding. They spent probably like 15-20 minutes on it, because it turns out that is actually a great topic. That's why it had so many legs for them, because obviously they were talking about what we should and should not be doing, and also some questions that Harris had about some positions that are held in the Bible on masturbation. Right.
Well, I think that was right after the definition of God discussion, but I'm not going to spoil how is that relevant.
Yeah.
But that was very interesting. But I'm obviously more on Sam's side, but one thing I want to give credit to Jordan for is that he really, really tried to steelman Sam. And like he wanted to spend a lot of time and effort to try to see if he's understanding Sam. Like, he kept on arguing Sam's points checking. Even, I mean, at the second event, Brett made them do that. But even at the first event, Jordan himself did that. And he was very charitable to Sam's positions. Even though I disagree with a lot of Jordan's positions, I really think his style and the manner he had and the way he went about doing it was very nicely done. Like, as an individual, I have a lot of respect for him,
right,
even though I disagree with a lot of his views.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. What after the events this weekend, what do you still disagree with Jordan on? What's the main thing?
Well, I mean, the agreement part is with Jordan is obviously both Sam and most of the audience agreed with them on free speech stuff. So, but I was more interested in the disagreement parts, and I kind of think like Jordan Peterson is like a Christian apologist, and there's two methods that he uses to be a Christian apologist, and they are not new, but I think his the way he argues those 2 points, these arguments are ancient tricks into defending ideologies that are, I think, indefensible, but they're not new, but they were he just makes it very interesting, and people just love the way he speaks, and I think that's why. And also the main reason why he got popular at the beginning was mostly free speech stuff. These are just stuff that
which he was right on.
Yeah, he was right on.
He might have been a little confused on what the laws that were coming out that he was objecting to was what was going to happen, but I think he was more worried about where that could lead to.
Yeah,
and that's what kind of lit a fire under his ass and got him out in the public eye and started essentially protesting and saying that he was going to go on a hunger strike and all these things that really bolstered his popularity.
I think some of these Canadian laws, that the effect of them, I think he's exaggerating a little bit. Not a little bit. I think he's exaggerating, but overall the principles of that he's supporting when it comes to free speech, I think we could all get behind. With regards to his views on Christianity and God, I just I think this is Christianity. I see it like Islam. I see it as a growing ideology. But I think Christianity is like a dragon or a beast that is like injured and dying, and just because it's a little bit weak, it's basically trying to put off a different image of itself, just so that it could survive. And the way it's doing that through Jordan Peterson and other people is that it's taking credit for some of the values that Christianity had nothing to do with it. It's specifically enlightenment values that are way more recent than Christianity. Christianity has been around for 2,000 years, yet these values are quite recent. They're post-enlightenment, but if Christianity was responsible for them, they would be older. And there's no, and you could look in the scripture, and the amount of dancing around and reinterpretation that they have to do to try to even suggest that these values come from there, it seems pretty. I don't know. I don't want to.
Yeah. So Jordan's trying to justify why they're there and why they were useful, and trying to connect them, into our modern day, which is extremely hard because it's so archaic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, trying to reason all of that is damn near impossible. And what I see happening is I see Jordan making moral judgments himself on what is supposed to be the word of God, and which is the right thing to do, by the way.
Yeah.
It's like if you get a doctrine that says, stone people to death for whatever reason, you make a moral judgment on that, and you don't stone people to death. And we've seen this evolve through Christianity since they were doing this crap.
But the problem is that they do good things, but then they give the credit to an ideology that doesn't deserve any credit. And that's very dangerous, because then that ideology will survive under this mask, and then will come. Yeah. But
what I'm saying is that it's much better to not be stoning and promoting the stoning of homosexuals than to be actually doing it, right?
Well,
but it's not an excuse.
No,
it would be better if we could view these myths as myths And just like we view, the night before Christmas, and we pull the good things that we want from it if we want, or we can just, get on with it. We don't reference the Iliad all the time. We do. It's kind of a piece of history.
Well, we can reference myth as much as we want, as long as we acknowledge that they're myth and they're not real.
I know, but what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily special enough for us to be talking about the only reason why we're talking about it is because so many people believe that it's actually true. And this is something I wanted to talk about next, is that this idea of metaphorical truth. And this is something that and it's amazing because I actually, like, just from getting to know Jordan over the weekend and in the past few months here, just chatting with him, I actually think he is a genius. And I think he is, I hear him talk as a scientist about clinical psychology and the work he's doing with self-authoring. And I think this is very meaningful, powerful work that he's doing in that regard. But yeah, I think, I sometimes wonder, like, how one can be a psychologist when this idea of metaphorical truth can maybe be the right answer, but kind of a placebo. I just see this version of this metaphorical God as a placebo that doesn't necessarily need to be there.
It sounds like the same as when they say alternative medicine or alternative facts. Why do you call it alternative medicine? Because it's not medicine. Why do you call it alternative
once
facts?
It works, it's medicine, right?
Or alternative facts. They're not facts. So metaphorical truth
is kind of like alternative truth.
Yeah, they're not truth.
Yeah,
they're not. They're false. That's why. Yeah. I mean, we have to. I think we shouldn't even call them truth. If they're useful, just say.
Metaphor.
Just say useful metaphors. I don't even think they are. Most of them are useful the way they think it's useful. But even if you think that, don't call things that are not true. Yeah. Just call them useful metaphors.
Yeah, that's and that is the main thing that keeps this discussion engine going between Sam and Jordan. It always comes back to that, because it's like you can make as many pronouncements as you want about something being useful,
right?
But then once you say it's true, then someone's going to be like, well, what do you mean it's true? Right. Santa doesn't actually come to your home,
right?
Like, it's not true in that sense. Well, I know it's not true in that sense, but metaphorically,
right,
it's true to me,
right?
It's like I just wish that this idea of metaphorical truth could just stick to just being. We don't have to call it truth. We can just call it a metaphor, a useful metaphor. If someone thinks it's a useful metaphor, the burden of proof is on them to demonstrate how it is. Right. And I think Jordan does a lot of that.
Right.
He attempts that, and I think it's valuable for us to have metaphors to look to when teaching and things like that. But I'm not convinced that there's very many useful metaphors in any scripture.
But even if stories are useful, the thing is that they're more useful if you actually acknowledge that they're not true. Right? They become dangerous when people think it's true. Like, you could point to Harry Potter and you can say, this is a story against racism. This is communicating to people how, in a very interesting way, how we shouldn't be prejudiced towards people just because they're half-blood or something like that, right? But that's interesting and that may be useful. But it becomes a problem if people actually think Hogwarts is real, and then they have a whole bunch of kids packing up their bags, going looking for Hogwarts, missing at night. Like, it becomes not useful when people... even kids know the difference between pretend and real. And they can... you can tell kids when they're pretending to be Batman or Superman or whatever, they know they're not Batman. But they can still enjoy it. If kids can do that, why do we as adults, why do we have to pretend things are real? And Jordan makes it seem like it doesn't matter if people... think it's true or not, but it makes all the difference. But having such a flawed view of your universe, of your identity, of how you came to be, and having it so far away from reality is going to impact your decisions.
So I'm sure what Jordan would say to you right now is that, okay, yeah, you're right about scientific truth, but then he would say, but not about metaphorical truth. People don't treat metaphorical truth the same. This is what he would say.
But that's what I'm saying is they do. People read stories and and enjoy them, and maybe even get inspired by them while understanding.
But they don't think they're true.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
So no, but the thing is that Christians and Muslims do think their stories are true. I'm just saying, even
and
if
it can lead to major danger.
Right. I mean, I read the Bible and the Quran, and I enjoy it for different reasons, and I think they become more enjoyable if you don't believe in them. And it's actually, the Quran is a very stressful book to read if you actually think it's true.
Right.
But yeah, I just don't. I think that belief part is such a key part of this equation, and the fact is that represents Christians and Muslims. If you don't believe in these things, you're not a Muslim or you're not a Christian by definition.
Yeah, and so here's an interesting thought, and this is why when I first spoke to Jordan on the Pangburn Philosophy podcast, I didn't say much. I wanted to listen to Jordan, and I wanted to hear exactly how his idea of metaphorical truth, how it related to atheism.
Right.
And something I realized, and I think I'm right about this as far as my definition of atheism is concerned. The lack of belief in any gods. That belief that we're talking about is founded in evidence. So
lack of it.
Lack of evidence. So if someone comes up to me and says, I believe Zeus exists, then I say, do you have evidence? And then they say, well, there's this book. I say, well, come talk to me when you have more evidence.
Right.
It's a lack of belief. I'm not asserting that the God does not exist. I just have no good reason to believe. So apply that to what Jordan is saying. By my definition of atheism, Jordan is an atheist.
Right. Yeah.
And he probably wouldn't want to label himself as such, but I'm just saying under my definition, he is an atheist, but he's a cultural Christian.
Yeah, I mean, but I wish he would say he's not a Christian and he's just a cultural Christian. There's nothing wrong with being a cultural Christian.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you could enjoy whatever culture you want, but he would never say that, and that's the danger of it.
Well, I wouldn't say he could get to that because he's a scientist. His mind can be changed. Right.
I mean, he has never said that, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you say you're a Christian instead of saying you're a cultural Christian, you're basically you're apologizing. You're coming up with excuses for an idea that deserves zero excuses. This is an ideology that has been against these enlightenment values it's been taking credit for hundreds of years. There's nothing within Christianity that is worth preserving or celebrating. It needs to be just seen as it could only be enjoyed as a historical document, but as a guide to life, it should be completely dismissed.
Right. What do you think about this? I know I've heard people talk about God's existence with Jordan before, and Jordan always goes to, well, it depends on what you mean by exist. So for me, I mean, exist for me means, is there evidence of something's existence? And when I'm talking about existence, I'm talking about in reality, not in our minds. Right. Not in our ideas, and it seems like that gets a little muddy with Jordan.
Yeah.
In that like can't we just be clear about what we mean? Like exist has always meant exist.
Right.
It hasn't meant like if an idea exists in my mind, that exists.
Right.
It's like that's kind of dodging the question.
He seems to think, I don't know, tell me if you feel this way. He seems to think like words are these magical things that can only refer to something. I see words as just like agreements that we have with each other over what they represent, right? There's nothing.
They're placeholders. There's no intrinsic value to words. They're just placeholders.
Right. Like if you ask me what do you mean by exist, I was like, okay, what do you mean by mean? right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, just shut down the conversation.
Yeah.
And like,
we've agreed to certain definitions for
Right.
certain terms, even if they're not perfect all the time. And if we need to change them, we can have a discussion about that.
Right.
But I don't see a need to redefine existence.
I think people dance around labels mostly for ideas that are hard to defend. You just dodge defending them by just trying to make it make their definitions very complicated.
Well, let's talk about Brett Weinstein next, because
Right.
As far as I know, Brett's an atheist.
Yes.
But I think he still celebrates some cultural aspects of religion, like we all do.
Right.
And like, it baffles me that someone as reasonable as Brett can get there no problem. It seems.
Get where?
Get to the root of the issue and admit.
Yes.
And adopt the atheist label.
Right.
But there's something that Jordan, it's almost like when I see him dealing with this, I see him worrying about what could happen if he was to, let go of this
Right.
idea of, I guess, partial or metaphorical existence.
Right.
Of God.
I think there's a fear of loss of identity as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people think that there's a void that can't be filled if you take this away from them.
Right.
Which is, I don't buy into that. There's so much the world offers to. I mean, one of the reasons why there might be not that many options is because these ideas like Islam and Christianity have claimed so much monopoly over community, over awe, over morality. The fact people say like we can't, if you take these away, there's nothing to fill them. The lack of alternative options is because these ideas, they are the problem. They have become the monopolize these industries, and that's why there's very little competition to them. Part of the solution is to remove them from the society. The market will provide alternative ways. These are human needs. These are human needs, inspiration, awe, community. When you remove when you remove the tight grip that these ideologies have over these providing these needs, when you remove that, people will offer alternatives. There are so many, and the thing is that people are looking for one answer to replace like something as big as Christianity or Islam. But the one problem with Islam and Christianity is that they have one answer for many things. But the thing is that we are different. Right? Some of us get inspired by music. Some of us get inspired by science. Some of us get inspired by nature and hiking. And the thing is that because whatever fills these voids is going to be different for different people, people think like we didn't come up with an answer. But no, we did come up with answers. We have coming up with answers. It's just that many different answers. And it doesn't seem big because they're so small and unique for every different individual. But we have so many options. We have art and science, right? Yeah. That's what we have, and that's what we have to provide to people. I mean, people think like these Christianity and Islam have such an advantage because they're giving you hope, so much hope to an afterlife, and they say that you can't compete with that. But I say you can compete with that because they're not just giving you hope for another life. They're also stealing this life. We are offering something real. We're offering this life back. That's what we are offering.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. It makes me think of a question that came up. It was the first question asked at the event with Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson, and the first question from the audience was, and it was directed towards Jordan, and the question was, Jordan, if all human beings all of a sudden cease to exist, would God still exist? And I thought it was such a poignant question to this idea of a metaphorical, the metaphorical truth in a God, and Jordan admitted that he didn't know how to answer that question, and I think if people want to go online, they can see the replay of that whole event. But I thought that was, first of all, the courage to say I don't know.
Right.
Is so important as a scientist. Yeah. And Jordan had the courage to say it. It is not easy. There are many scientists out there that would rather say, oh, well, I don't know if you can know, or they would dodge the question, but he did answer the question. And this tells me he is at least working on the problem.
Right.
And it would be much different if you were to go out and ask Dinesh D'Souza that question, the answer is going to be, well, of course, God is all knowing, God exists, and God is outside of this space time. And, it's, I brought that up because I think the wheels are not broken in Jordan's head when thinking about this. I think he is thinking about it. I just think this introduction of metaphorical truth is unnecessary. We can call it a metaphor.
But that says something so key, because if Jordan believed in the Christian God, the answer would be a definitely yes. The God would exist even without humans around, right? And that means that whatever he believes or whatever he's considering is definitely not the Christian God, right? And this is such an important point because a lot of people defend Jordan Peterson's view of Christianity, and they say Christianity is such an ancient idea, and it has survived for a good reason, and that's why we can't just get rid of it, because there must be something to it, and that's why we're keeping it. But at the same time, the same people are saying, well, what's wrong with reinterpreting God and Christianity? I'm like, well, then if this is something new, then your whole argument about we need this because it's been so old, which doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. You might as well rename it. You know.
Yeah, but then what? But if you rename it, then you're bringing something new. Then your whole argument for it must be first of all, old doesn't mean right. I don't even know what that really exactly. But now it's not even old, right? Yeah. So we have to re-examine this whole thing.
There's older belief systems out there.
right. Zoroastrianism, Hinduism.
Yeah.
And actually
the belief system that you probably shouldn't shit in your own bed. That is a belief system that has been around for a long time.
Right. The thing is that, whatever Jordan looks at the Bible, whatever if you listen to his Bible studies, it makes it seem like these ancient barbaric ideas, there's some wisdom behind them. But for that to be true, these authors had to have been wise beyond what could have been expected from the people at the time.
Yeah, Bronze Age peasants, right?
Right. Like, yeah. I don't understand how you could think that. Like, how could you think these people back then? I mean, there are many other texts from back there as well. How come we're not claiming the same thing about those texts? What is special about the Bible texts just because it survived? Because the fact is that how could you think that people that didn't have access to information that we have, to biology, to psychology, to all the books that Jordan Peterson himself reads and tells us that we need to read before we even understand the Bible, then the people that wrote the Bible didn't have access to these books. Where did they get all this knowledge from? Mm-hmm. Isn't it more likely that it is as barbaric and simple and backward as it sounds, and all these wisdom that you're suggesting is behind them is not really there?
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm so I know these arguments is because I've seen it in Islam apologists. What Jordan Peterson says about the Bible is what a lot of modern reformist Muslims say about the Quran, right? A book that tells you to beat your wife, right? They make excuses for that, and the arguments are very similar. Right? And if you could apply that argument for the wisdom behind, the deeper meaning behind the Bible, the way Jordan Peterson does, you could do that. You can do that with any book. You could do that with Mein Kampf if you wanted to. You could do that with Green Eggs and Ham. You could do that with the Quran. You could do that with any random... Sam Harris said you could do that with the cookbook if you wanted to, right? Mm-hmm. And I just think it's nothing there. I think wise people come up with good ways to make excuses for things that average people can't make excuses for.
Yeah. So let's move on to... So we introduced this new model of you being out mingling in the lobby before the event, and we're broadcasting this onto the screen in the theater so that people can see what's going on. So you did some interviews. What was that like, and did you have some interesting answers to your questions?
Yeah, it was so interesting, and the the people that spoke to me, I was so surprised on how much well-read and
You mean you were surprised that you're not the only smart guy on the planet?
No, no, that's not what I said. I just thought like 10%, 20% of people there would have read the books and listened to all the podcasts. But I asked him, did you listen to that podcast? And we were like, yeah, they had views, even though I disagreed with half of them. But it was interesting to me how closely they were following both of these people, right?
Yeah.
Almost all of them.
This is evidence that it's become popular to think.
Right. Yeah. And they were after the interviews I did after the events were even more interesting because people came out and they were like shook. Right.
Oh yeah.
And just capturing their experience after the event was so cool. Like their views on it. I asked a lot of them if they felt different because most of them have been listening to these Sam's podcasts, Jordan Peterson's podcasts, their debates with each other on other people's podcasts, and one person I said I listened to 10 hours of both of these guys just before this over and over again, and I asked them if they felt differently about it watching it here, and they thought it's not even close. It's not even close. Like they were so happy to be there.
Like actually being there is just, it's hard to explain.
Yeah, it's hard.
That's what I'm trying. Like I was trying to explain, like just this thickness in the air. That's all I can. Like I just like. I was moving. I felt like I was moving like molasses, and I was just like, it was just nuts. And speaking about shook, like after the event, after I said goodbye to the audience, and I came back off stage, and I went downstairs, and Brett Weinstein was standing there, and we both we kind of crossed paths, and we looked at each other, and almost simultaneously we said, "Did that just happen?" Right. Like, and we just like stared at each other, and this was a monumental thing that happened.
Right.
And I, you know, in a sense, when I decided I wanted to produce this event, I knew it was going to be special, but you know, it just was beyond what I thought would have been possible.
Yeah.
Now for a live event of this kind.
Yeah. Okay, and one other thing I want to say about Jordan, even though I'm very much biased against Sam, and I honestly think Sam just crushed it, right? But I know Jordan Peterson fans are going to disagree with me. But one thing I want to say about him is that he seems very humble. And one thing that was when I was interviewing people, I asked people, what do you think about Jordan Peterson? And people said, oh, I was just talking to him. I was like, what? Yeah, he came before the event, and he was just in the middle of the people in the lobby and outside just talking to people. He wanted to meet them, right? I was like, he's there? Like, yeah, he's just talking to us. It was awesome. And that made the experience, that's such a great experience for people. Like, people, I don't think people expected to come to the event, and they're just going to watch them speak, and then, you know, but then they came to the lobby, and then he's just there, and he's meeting with them. What an amazing thing to do. And even when he's like signing the books, some of these pictures, I hope they get released at some point, but you can see how much he actually listens to his followers and fans. Like he really cares about people, right? Yeah. Even though I very much disagree with him, I as a person, I
think you disagree on just a very few things, right?
Well,
they are fundamental.
Yeah,
they are fundamental things.
Well, as an atheist activist, I would say the most important things.
Sure.
But this is something you don't get also in listening to podcasts and YouTube videos, right? You don't get to see the human, you know, the person behind these ideas.
Yeah, right? I mean, in your mind, these people are demonized and to a point. It's not like not the people. I should say that it's the idea. So the ideas that they have are demonized, and it has a bit of an effect on how you see this person carrying themselves and then you see them and they're like, hey, they're an ape just like me.
Yeah. And you actually start liking them even though you're against their ideas, you like them as people. And the thing is, I try to like when I listen to their arguments, I'm neutral towards them and against their ideas or pro their ideas. But then when you meet them, it's hard to hate people, or, you know, when other people start like attacking them personally instead of going after their ideas. when you meet them personally, you can see how empty and how useless that is, right? Because no matter how much you don't like someone's ideas, at the end of the day, we are fighting ideas. We're not fighting people, right? And they are doing the same thing. And I felt like Jordan was doing the same thing. Like even though he's been very much against a lot of atheists, the way he treats and talks to Sam was very much respectful, and he was very much trying to come from a understanding position, trying to steel Sam's position.
Yeah.
I keep talking about Jordan, but I have to say though, Sam, his one-liners and his in the way I don't want to say much because you guys have to watch it, but Sam was at his best as well. Like he was fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I've been hanging out and working with Sam for couple of years now, and we spent a lot of time talking, and I've also, I've seen, I think, almost every single Sam Harris appearance in history that he has had, and I think this was 25 to 50% beyond anything I've ever seen from him.
Right.
And just how dialed in, how much he cared about this discussion, both parties, and Brett, like, everyone cared so much. Like it was kids in a candy shop everywhere, like getting ready for the event at dinner. Everyone was just vibrating. Everyone was so excited. The excitement for intellectual discourse. And that's what we're seeing around the world right now. Right.
And Sam was very nice to, he's like, I don't know, this is something people also don't see on YouTube and on podcasts. When he's walking around, when he was leaving, he shook the hand of all the crew members, thanking them for what they did. And he also left Pangburn Philosophy. He signed a book and for the Pangburn team, and he left a very nice note for thanking the team.
I think Jordan and Sam both did that.
Yeah. That was very sweet as well. Yeah, both of them are great people.
Yeah, and I must say, any of you who do not follow Brett Weinstein, you really need to get on that. He is brilliant.
Yeah, he is.
He's the glue that held this whole weekend together.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it wouldn't have been possible to this degree without Brett, and he was a perfect choice, and the most obvious choice. It wasn't genius coming up with Brett Weinstein as the moderator. He's the perfect bridge.
Right.
When talking about the issues that were discussed.
What do you think is going to happen in London and Dublin?
Oh man, it's almost overwhelming to even think of right now. Still coming down off this weekend, but
so for the people that don't know, can you just explain what's going to happen?
Well, so we're going over to Dublin and London. Dublin on July 14th, and we'll be in London July 16th, and we have booked 2 massive arenas. Like even just talking about this right now, my hands are shaking. So we've booked these 2 massive arenas for these 2 gladiators, with a third as well in Douglas Murray.
Yes.
And Douglas will be engaging in the conversation, but he'll also kind of be playing the role of moderator as well.
It's Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson again, but with Douglas Murray as moderator. Yeah.
And we're at 3 Arena in Dublin, which is basically, that's the big top there.
Right.
And then we go to the O2 in London, which is like, I mean, the O2, just honestly right now, those of you who are listening, look up just a few photos of the O2 Arena.
In London.
This is in London. This is where we're doing these conversations now. This is fucking mind-boggling to me that things have gotten to this point where the interest is so big that we can get together. And it's like the opposite of groupthink. This is an environment where big groups get together and they can discuss and debate and think
and disagree.
I saw so many conversations that were happening in the lobby and at our after party, which was a huge success and so much fun.
Right.
Conversations happening, people civilly disagreeing and being okay with that, not getting triggered. This is the way we need to approach politics. You know, all of our biggest world issues of war. We need to start by thinking, and then we adopt science and reason and rely on evidence to show us the way.
Right.
But this is, and it's hard to believe, but this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Sorry. This is ground level of the iceberg. We haven't even scratched the surface
Right.
of what this is going to become. I see events in the future with some of the biggest music acts that we've ever seen.
Before the debates?
Paired with,
Right.
in some way combined, in maybe festival style, with these massive debates and discussions, so we can have a healthy dose of artistic inspiration with our scientific inspiration. So these events in Dublin and London are face melters. They're so huge. There's going to be 10,000 people per show.
Wow.
And like I said, I've said it a few times now, the reception I heard for the 3,000 people per night that came from the audience when I introduced Jordan, Sam, and Brett were the biggest receptions I've ever heard in houses like that. Bigger than I've heard for famous music acts. And we're more than tripling that in Dublin and London. So this is, the atmosphere is going to be crippling.
Right.
We're all going to have to just keep our wits about us to be able to get through it and make sure these events are special in any way we can.
Do you think the topics are going to be a bit different when it comes in London and Dublin from the Vancouver ones?
Well, the conversation is just going to keep going.
Yeah.
The introduction of Douglas is definitely going to bring on some change. There's going to be discussions about politics for sure.
For sure, yeah. And Islam probably.
And Islam for sure.
Right.
So, and what I'm really interested in is I want to hear both. I'm really interested. I've heard a lot of Sam's takes on Islam, of course, but I haven't heard much from Jordan on Islam. So I'm really interested to see if there is a spot in his idea of metaphorical truth for Islamic belief system.
Somebody asked him that in one of the events. I remember that, and he thought it was a very interesting question. And he thinks that I think his answer had something to do with the fact that Muhammad was a warlord. So he also admitted that he has to think about that, but he had a problem with using that as a metaphorical truth specifically because Muhammad was a warlord. But I think his ideas, ever since then, he must have thought about it a lot more.
Definitely.
So it would be interesting to see what he has to say.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's a fair answer. It's like not everyone has had time even to think about every single possible answer to every question. So, I think, even just talking to Jordan and Sam leading up to this event, they actually, I know both of them spent a lot of time thinking on this, and and the anticipation. It was just like, I wish I could just give everyone a feeling of what it was like, but literally the old adage, you had to be there. You really had to be there.
Right.
But like I said, there will be an opportunity at some point to access the content.
And for people that are waiting for the content, this is where Jordan Peterson, for the first time, came up with a full definition of God in his view, because he always wanted to avoid that. But he posted on Twitter asking his followers what are the questions that he wants to answer during this debate. And either number one or number two was define God. So he knew that even he has to address this, and he did it for the very first. This is the main question that people wanted him to finally answer, and he did it for the first time at this event. So we're gonna look for that when you.
And I mean, not like you guys need any more teasers, but he. And also, like Brett described after the event, both speakers made some concessions.
Yes,
which was very important. But we'll leave that up to you guys to kind of pick those out and debate amongst yourselves and send email to us at admin@pangburnphilosophy.com to let us know what you guys thought of the event. And once we do eventually release the content, keep us just keep us in the loop on what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, we should invite some of them.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I will say is we are going to start doing more different variations of content on the podcast and kind of this new Pangburn TV model. So stay tuned for that. We are going to have a call-in aspect to our show eventually, which is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to all of our patrons are going to have first access to this. So if you want to become a patron and help support us so we can get, we've been able to improve our equipment just because of the generosity of our patrons. So I want to definitely give them a shout out.
Right.
So if you want to become a patron, just go to patreon.com /Pangburn, and that's or / Pangburn, and that's where you will find us, and you can support us and sign up for our newsletter. There's going to be a newsletter coming out more frequently now.
Right. And our newsletters is where we send out a lot of the access to our events before we release it anywhere else. Also, when we release the content, our newsletter subscribers are going to be the first people that are going to have access to it. So
right. All right. Well, thank you, Armin, and thank you guys so much for listening, and always thank you so much for supporting what we're doing here. It's impossible if people aren't buying tickets or supporting us through Patreon or whatever, and even just supporting us with feedback it means a lot to us. So thank you so much. My name is Travis Pangburn, and this has been the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast, and let art and science inspire. Thank you.